All right, welcome back. We are on part 8. Where did the Book of Mormon come from? In our last video, we looked at the first two questions. Were they present? Were they corroborated? Now we want to look at the other two questions. Were they accurate? Were they biased? And we want to give a satisfactory answer to these last two questions. So, were they accurate in the description that they gave of the Book of Mormon? If manuscript found was indeed transformed into it? Let's check it out. So, it's very interesting when you start to go through their statements. What do we find? Well, notice first of all, these are some of the details that are given if you'll look back through their statements. Number one, you'll see that they mention the title, manuscript found. And what's interesting to me is how they distinguish that from manuscript story, Conneaut Creek. There was indeed a difference in the titles, right? And then we got historical novel. And as you can see, it was John Spalding, Henry Lake, John Miller, and Mrs. Davidson and Mrs. McKinstry who said that was the title, and also Joseph Miller, Abner Jackson, and Reddick McKee. Some of them called it a historical novel. So you can see those who mentioned that: Spalding, Miller, Wright, Smith, Howard, Cunningham, Davidson, McKinstry, Miller, Jackson, McKee. And some of them said, well, they're the first settlers of America. Spalding, Martha, John Miller, Aaron Wright, Smith, and Artemus Cunningham. Some said, hey, these are the descendants, are actually the Native Americans. So you got John and Martha Spalding, you got Henry Lake, Aaron Wright, and Abner Jackson, and Reddick McKee. All right, here's the next couple of details. Journey from Jerusalem, Nephi and Lehi were the principal heroes of the story. Quarrels and contentions, two nations. So John Spalding, Martha Spalding, Henry Lake, John Miller, Aaron Wright, Oliver Smith, Abner Jackson, Reddick McKee, Journey from Jerusalem. They mentioned Nephi and Lehi, John Spalding, Martha Spalding, John Miller, Oliver Smith, Artemus Cunningham, McKinstry, Abner Jackson, Reddick McKee. They had quarrels and contentions. Spalding and Martha Spalding and Lake and Smith and Jackson and McKee. They went into two distinct nations, the Nephites and the Lamanites. So John and Martha Spalding, Abner Jackson, and Reddick McKee. All right, our next witness statements on details. So we got bloody wars, we got arts and sciences, and it came to pass, and no religious matter or no scripture content. So we got John Spalding, Martha Spalding, Henry Lake, John Miller, Oliver Smith, Abner Jackson, talking about bloody wars. Talking about arts and sciences, John Spalding, John Miller, Oliver Smith, Matilda Davidson. And it came to pass, John and Martha Spalding, Henry Lake, Oliver Smith, Joseph Miller, Abner Jackson. No religious matter, John and Martha, Henry Lake, John Miller, Oliver Smith, Nahum Howard. And then we have forts and mounds. That's why we have those today. Obsolete style, judgment on the old world, and account of Laban. So we got John Spalding, Martha Spalding, Aaron Wright, Oliver Smith, Nahum Howard, Artemus Cunningham, Matilda Davidson, McKinstry, Joseph Miller, Abner Jackson. The obsolete style, or what we call the written in the King James Version kind of style. John and Martha Spalding, Cunningham, Davidson, and McKee. Judgment on the Old World, very interesting. That was written by Oliver Smith. Interesting enough. And then the account Laban was given by Henry Lake. Humorous passages. Now, that's very interesting to me, because the Book of Mormon does have some funny stuff in it, and I'll bring it out later on. And then there's Moroni, Straits of Darien, Nephi. So John Miller wrote about that part. Moroni was mentioned by John Miller and McKinstry and Abner Jackson. And the Straits of Darien were mentioned by John Miller, and Nephi was mentioned by Artemus Cunningham. So, we also have verbal alterations or additions, and Abner Jackson mentioned that part. So, when we put all of this together, I want you to see something very interesting take place. So we take all those details, and I'm going to skip just a little bit further. Okay, so we mentioned about 20 details. Now, friend, all except really for number 12, no religious matter. Because the reason that's an anomaly was because Sidney Rigdon added to it, and transformed it in what we call the Book of Mormon. So I actually got this from Grant Hardy, an LDS member, and he gives a basic narrative of the Book of Mormon in his introduction. And notice what he says. I mean, this is very interesting. The Book of Mormon tells the story of a Hebrew prophet named Lehi, unknown in the Bible, who was warned by God to take his family and flee from Jerusalem at about the time of the Babylonian invasion in 597 BC. After wandering through the Arabian desert for several years, he and his family built a ship and sailed to the New World. There, the group quickly divides along religious lines, with one brother, Nephi, leading the more righteous members deeper into the wilderness, and two older brothers, Laman and Lemuel, retain control of the majority of the family. The Nephites are eventually joined by another larger, more secular colony from Jerusalem, a group that had coalesced around Mulek, one of the sons of King Zedekiah. The Book of Mormon, so, I mean, if you think about what it says, tells the story. Lehi flees from Jerusalem at the time of the Babylonian invasion in 597. There, the group quickly divides along religious lines. The Nephites, and if you look at our details thus far, look at which ones fit the description of manuscript found. Historical novel, First Settlers of America, Journey from Jerusalem, Judgment of the Old World, Nephi, Lehi are mentioned, Quarrels and Contentions, Nephites. So that's what we got thus far. But let's keep reading. So he goes on to say, Hardy says, there the group quickly divides along religious lines, with one brother Nephi, leading the more righteous members deeper into the wilderness, and two older brothers, Laman and Lemuel, retaining control of the majority of the family. The Nephites are eventually joined by another large, more secular colony from Jerusalem, a group that coalesced around Mulek, one of the sons of King Zedekiah. In the meantime, the Lamanites possibly merged with other indigenous peoples, for their numbers are always greater than the combined Nephites and Mulekites. The Book of Mormon chronicles the continuing conflicts between the Nephites and Lamanites, and gives particular attention to the last 150 years before the birth of Jesus, when a Christian church of anticipation is set up among those Nephites who believe the prophecies of the coming Messiah. The basic historical narrative is supplemented by records of wars, migrations, missionary journeys, sermons, letters, prophecies, and quotations from the Hebrew Bible. So, what do we have now? What descriptions are given? Well, we got the separated to two nations, Lamanites and Nephites, bloody wars, no religious matter. Interesting enough, because religious matter, sermons, letters, prophecies, quotations from the Hebrew Bible, and I would say the New Testament, as we'll look later on. Finally, after his death in Jerusalem, the resurrected Jesus appears to the Nephites at a time of political and environmental upheaval to affirm his church, clarify doctrine, and preach a version of the Sermon on the Mount, a 200-year period of peace, prosperity, and unity ensues, which is recounted in fewer than 3 pages, followed by the resurgence of the ancient divisions of Nephites and Lamanites and the complete destruction of the corrupt Nephite society around AD 385. The last Nephite prophet Moroni closes the book with the addition of a brief record of an earlier pre-Nephite people, the Jaredites, who sailed from the Old World to the New World at the time of the Tower of Babel, and were destroyed by the factional fighting caused by their wickedness. So, what do you see now when we look at all of these? When we look at the details that fit, that were found in the manuscript found that fit the Book of Mormon. We got Moroni mentioned. But then he goes on. In the early 1800s, Joseph Smith was troubled by all the denominations around him. He wanted to know if he could discover the true church. He supposedly had a vision in which he saw two persons, the Father and the Son, who told that he would be the one to help prepare the restoration of the original church. On September 21st, 1823, Moroni appeared as an angel to Joseph Smith. He told Smith about the plates and showed him where they were located. The next day, Smith went to the hill Cumorah, where they were located, and opened up the stone box to see the plates, but he was not allowed to take them. After 4 years, Smith was allowed to take the plates, and scribes helped Smith as he dictated the translation. So you can see there, the plates were hid up in the hill Cumorah, where they were located. And so, record hidden in the earth, right? But it can go further. The story is presented as the work of the prophet General Mormon, Moroni's father, who took time from his military campaigns to compose a book-length summary of records originally written by a long line of Nephite prophets, a sequence of texts known collectively as the large plates of Nephi. At some point, Mormon added to his own abridgment to small plates of Nephi another early text that covered the events of the first generation of Nephites from a more religious perspective. All these records, including those of the Jaredites, were said to have been written on thin sheets of metal. In addition, Lehi's family had also brought from Jerusalem a complete set of Hebrew scriptures engraved on metal, which they called the plates of brass. The last Nephite record keeper, Moroni, buried his father's plates with a few of his own comments and the abridgment of the Jaredite records sometime around AD 421. And if we look at that, Mormon is indeed one of the characters that were mentioned by the witnesses. Now, Caldery says something interesting in their book. Where did the Book of Mormon really come from? Or an updated version called the Spalding Enigma. They say in a footnote, it's interesting to note that the Mormons have systematically removed more than 1,000 instances of the phrase "and it came to pass" or some variation thereof from published versions of the Book of Mormon over the years, allegedly for the sake of improving clarity and continuity. Of the 1,147 paragraphs in the original 1830 edition, 771, or just over 2/3, begin with some form of the phrase "and it came to pass." Of course, the phrase occurs within the text of paragraphs as well, thus accounting for the more than 1,000 incidents referred to above. Certainly, such extensive use of this phrase does not derive from the Old or New Testaments, wherein the phrase "it came to pass" or variants thereof appear only 73 times in the entire King James Version of the Bible. Neither does it occur with such frequency in any of the other of Joseph Smith's extensive writings, nor, notice this, nor in Spalding's manuscript story, Conduit Creek, that first manuscript. So I think that's very interesting that is mentioned. So remember how "and it came to pass," render it ridiculous? Well, that fits it to a T, friends. The manuscript found being matched to the Book of Mormon. And then we got Ether, Mosiah, Alma, and Mormon. Arts and sciences are indeed mentioned there. Old obsolete style. Notice the usage of the King James language in the Book of Mormon. We got I Nephi, Artemis Cunningham. Remember the recurring statement I Nephi. And what's interesting, it's found 84 times in 1st Nephi. And out of 84 times, it's found 60 times in 1st Nephi alone. And there you have the references. And the others are found 24 times. Except for Helaman 9:36. But also, so that fits that detail, I Nephi, in our detail number 15 here. But also, it also fits detail number 10 of the arts and sciences and the old obsolete style of the King James Version, detail number 14. But we can go even a little bit further with this. The account of Laban. 1 Nephi chapter 3 through 7. Henry Lake, you'll remember what he said, and I'm going to go ahead and just skip a little bit of this, if that's all right. Okay, so notice Henry Lake says, one time, when Solomon Spalding was reading to me the tragic account of Laban, I pointed out to him what I considered an inconsistency. which he promised to correct, but by referring to the Book of Mormon, I find to my surprise, it stands there just as he reads it to me then. Now, what was the inconsistency? And I'm really glad that Robert Patterson Jr., the son of the one who was to publish the book, he says this in his book. Also, that an incongruity occurs in the story of Laban, where Nephi says, "They did speak many hard words unto us, their younger brothers, and they did smite us even with a rod. Whereupon an angel appears and says, Why do you smite your younger brother with a rod?" Consistency would require that the number, whether plural or singular, should be the same in both sentences. The oversight is in itself a trifle, but its occurrence in both the Spalding manuscript and the Book of Mormon is an unanswerable proof of identity. And I would certainly agree with that, and that fits detail number 16 of the account of Laban. But we got Miller, who mentioned the Straits of Darien. So Miller had said, when Spalding divested his history of its fabulous names by a verbal explanation, he landed his people near the Straits of Darien, which I am very confident he called Zarahemla. And then he also, Miller mentioned the red marks on the forehead and also Reddick McKee. And remember what he says? This is actually found in Alma 3, 1 through 5. So on hearing read the account from the book of the battle between the Amalekites and the Nephites, in which the soldiers of one army had placed a red mark on their foreheads to distinguish them from their enemies, it seemed to reproduce in my mind not only the narration, but the very words as they had been impressed on my mind by the reading of Spalding's manuscript. Now, interesting that the Straits of Darien, so that's found in Alma 3, 1 through 5. But I want to also focus more on this detail where he talks about the Straits of Darien. And very interesting enough, what I did was I went to Google Maps and I just typed in Straits of Darien. And very interesting, it brings up here Central America and Panama. So I found that very interesting. Now, why strait? This is called the Isthmus of Darien, but an obsolete definition of isthmus is the word strait. So I find that very interesting. Oh, sorry, I accidentally. Let me get back to where we were. So, if you read it again, when Spalding divested his history of its fabulous names by verbal exclamation, he led his people near the Straits of Darien, which I am very confident he called Zarahemla. So that fits the Straits of Darien. Now, Straits of Darien, why use straits? And this is just a possibility that cowardry in them make. Possibly Miller did not understand. But it's very interesting when you do go to Ether 2, 19 and 20. And it came to pass that Liv also did that which was good in the sight of the Lord. And in the days of Liv, the poisonous serpents were destroyed. Wherefore they did go into the land southward to hunt food for the people of the land. But the land was covered with animals of the forest. And Liv also himself became a great hunter, and they built a great city by the narrow neck of land by the place where the sea divides the land. Isn't that interesting? So, detail number 18 is matched when we think about what Ether 2 says there. Now, the humorous passages are mentioned by some. So, all you have to do is read Ether chapter 2, where the brother of Jared is told, according to the instructions of the Lord, may I tell you, of building these barges. Okay, and just read it, and if you, I'm sorry, but it's going to make you laugh, friends. It's so absurd to me, and so it fits that, it matches the humorous passages. Now, and think about some of the names that even Solomon Spalding came up with. Moron, Moroni, Moroni. If you don't, seems pretty funny to me. And then there's another story in Ether 15, whereupon he did pursue them, and on the morrow he did overtake them, and they fought again with the sword. And it came to pass, when they had all fallen by the sword, save it were Coriantumr and Shiz, behold, Shiz had fainted with the loss of blood. And it came to pass, that when Coriantumr had leaned upon his sword, that he rested a little, he smote off the head of Shiz. Now notice this, friends. He just decapitated someone. And it came to pass that after he had smitten off the head of Shiz, that Shiz raised up on his hands and fell. And after that he struggled for breath. He died. And it came to pass that Coriantumr fell to the earth and became as if he had no life. So, I mean, how can somebody who's become decapitated, and then they struggle for breath? I mean, I don't know. That just doesn't make any sense. But going a little bit further, so you can see how many details this fits. All right, what about the descendants of the American Indians and forts and mounds and no religious matter? Well, if Rigdon was involved, then he is a creative mind behind putting the scriptures and theological content. And you think about, let's just think about this for a moment. So the descendants of American Indians, well, where did Spalding learn that from? From Dartmouth, right? How about forts and mounds? He lived there in Conneaut, and maybe it sparked up in his mind an idea like, hey, I want to write about the inhabitants who once inhabited this country. And but the no religious matter would fit indeed the Rigdon, who is the one who put the scriptures and religious content into it. And then we got just to give an example of this. So I want you to look at Ether 1, 2 through 10. Definitely Spalding. Now I put with the exception of Ether 1, 3. Children of men is a phrase that it is found in the Bible, but we see as a key word when you look at these insertions that Rigdon made. He uses that phrase over and over again. So it might have been, he might have put that in there. But it is a historical matter. It does, and it came to pass 10 times. And it mentions all these interesting names here, as you can see. And I think, I think Solomon Spalding had a very creative mind in coming up with some of these names. As you can see here, like Hartham and Heth and Kish and Kim and Kib, Shiblon. But then, if you look at verse 11 and 12, it's possible that was inserted by Rigdon. I mean, I can't be totally certain about that. But notice the usage of the second person plural is you and ye. And there's a mention of Jesus Christ, which, as you know, Christ is Greek title. So, but it was written in Reformed Egyptian. And then you got Gentiles mentioned one time, which was a very popular theological theme used by Rigdon, talking about Gentiles. So I'm just giving an example here of maybe where there was those insertions. So then Ether 2, 13 through 3 through 5 was Spalding, because it's a historical narrative, and it came to pass is found 6 times, and it mentions those interesting names like Moriancumer and Shelam. But then when you get to chapter 3, 6 through 5, 6, is this Rigdon or Spalding? Or make sure it's hard to tell. But chapter 3, 6 through 28, I am convinced it is Rigdon inserted a lot, because look how, and it came to pass is found 3 times, okay? But then, interesting enough, there was a change in the Book of Mormon. So they had to change it from Benjamin, 1830 edition, to Mosiah in 1837. That was an error that was found. Now, that's interesting to me because, here, Joseph Smith, he's writing by the direct power gift of God and translating, and it said in one of the translation when they're translating the records, he made sure that every word was corresponding with the original language, and then they move on to the next set of translating a passage. So why was this overlooked? If it was supposed to be correct in the first place. But then you got all these scriptures here, which I believe show to you, written from the New Testament. So you can see there what I've shown, and then they got children of men 4 times. So that shows me that it fits detail number 12. This insertion of religious matter. So then you got Ether 6:1 through 8:19. Historical narrative. It came to pass is 42 times, and it mentions all these names. Let me just go a little bit further, if that's all right. Um, yeah. So let me stop here. So as you can see, let me just go ahead and get all these. If that's all right. So you can see here, Ether 6:1 through 8:19 mentions all those names, and then it mentions basically it has some scriptures. In fact, look at chapter 6, 10 through 14. I think that was probably Spalding who did copy that from Mark 6, 14 through 29. But look at it for yourself. Ether 8, 20 through 26. Definitely sermonic material. Notice the usage of the second person plurals, you and ye, and Gentiles and children of men. And then go to Ether 9, 1 through chapter 12, verse 3, and I believe it begins again with Spalding because it's historical narrative. Look how many times it came to pass. It's found 53 times. And it mentions all these different names. And as you can see, there's not very many scriptures, but there's a few. So just to let you see about that. So there was a little bit of insertion by Rigdon. And then you got Ether 12, 3 through 4 being probably Rigdon. Verse 5, Spalding. Verse 6 through chapter 13, definitely Rigdon, because King to Pass is only found one time. And I realize it's not a historical narrative, and that's basically, and King to Pass is going to follow a historical narrative. But then, look at all the scriptures that are found in regards to, just keeps going. And I do have this list available for you if you'd like to have a copy. I do have written a booklet called Questions About the Book of Mormon, in which I insert an appendix at the very back showing you all the scripture references in the Bible that are in the Book of Mormon. And that it contains sermonic material, and the children of men is found 4 times. And so you can see the matching with manuscript found there. And then go a little bit further. So I want to go a little bit further here, if that's all right. So chapter 13 through chapter 15, 34, definitely Spalding, his historical narrative. King to Pass found 46 times. And look at all these interesting names, and look how there's not found very many scriptures that probably were inserted by Rigdon. I'm pretty certain. Okay. Now, John Spalding would go on to write something else in the Yankee Muhammad American Whig Review. Now, I want you to listen very carefully what he says here, because we want to try to mention everything that these witnesses said. Solomon Spalding was born in Ashford, Connecticut, 1761. Graduated Dartmouth College, was afterward regularly ordained a minister. After preaching 3 or 4 years, he gave up his profession and commenced mercantile business in partnership with his brother Josiah in Cherry Valley, New York, where he soon failed. In 1809, he removed to Conneaut, Ohio, where he engaged himself in building an iron forge, but in this business also he soon failed. Casting about him for some method of retrieving his losses, he conceived the design of writing a historical romance upon a subject then much mooted in the scientific world, with the origin of the Indian tribes. This design he carried into execution between 1809 and 1812, and the produce of his labors was a novel entitled The Manuscript Found. In this work, Lyde mentioned that the American continent was colonized, now notice this, by Lehi, the son of Japheth, who sailed from Chaldea soon after the Great Dispersion and landed near the Isthmus of Darien. Lehi's descendants, who was styled Jaredites, interesting, spread gradually to the north, bearing with them the remains of antediluvian science and building those cities, the ruins of which we see in Central America, and the fortifications which are scattered along the Cordilleras. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up, friends, is because in the Book of Mormon, in the modern Book of Mormon, you have the Jaredites who came from the Tower of Babel. It says, and there is no mention of a Lehi among them. But then, 600 BC, several thousand years later, we find there is, of course, Lehi and Nephi's father is named Lehi. And so, is there a mix-up by John Spalding here? And I thought that it was very interesting that I think it may have been Cowdery and the authors of the Spalding Enigma or someone else. I can't remember exactly who, to be honest. Who that there is a character named the brother of Jared about 45 times in the book of Ether. And why was he not given a name? And speculation has been said that could this have been the original Lehi that John Spalding was referring to? Even though this detail is wrong, John had done a remarkable job I think he does a great job in matching all these details to the from manuscript found to the Book of Mormon, even if he only got that one detail wrong. So I just want to mention that for your consideration to think about. Were they biased? So this is a very important question. Did these writers have an ulterior motive? Did they have something to gain from lying? When we think about these guys who are the conduit Ohio witnesses, the family witnesses, what really did they have to gain from this? What about the co-workers of Solomon Spalding? What about the loan creditor witness? And even the Amity witnesses. What did they have to gain from this? Now, we could mention, was it riches? Well, it can't be riches because, think about it. They didn't have a book to sell, right? Nobody was making money by giving their testimony, right? And then was it sexual lust? A lot of these people believed in what we call the Christian worldview, which give us, laws of morality. They want to follow the laws of morality on that. Was it fame? Was it power? What do they have to gain from this, friends? Yes, of course, we find their names written down in books and newspapers. But did that give them power? Did that really make them that famous? But if you think about it the other way around, what did Joseph Smith, what did Sidney Rigdon have to gain if they transformed the manuscript found into the Book of Mormon? Did they have ulterior motives? What did they have to gain from lying about it? And I would suggest to you that when you look in the history of the Mormon Church, you think about the Kirtland Bank, you think about Joseph Smith and his polygamous marriages, you think about Sidney Rigdon and the power grab he had, and he wanted to be the spokesperson for Joseph Smith, and it starts to show you, who has to gain from lying? Definitely Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon do. And so we looked at all four of those questions, and I think you can see that the witnesses do pass all four of these tests. They are reliable. But you have to join me next time and as we explore more in an upcoming video, because there's still more to explore. We haven't unraveled all of this mystery.